that Georgia flipped blue. First time it flipped blue since Bill Clinton in '94. And
yes.
Georgia had so much focus because of the way the votes were counted and the timeliness of the vote and how it all happened. A lot of us were rooting for Georgia and, expecting this comeback. I know you're not a big sports guy, but on the internet, there were a lot of sports references. Atlanta's had a rough go in sports lately. A couple years ago, they had the worst meltdown in Super Bowl history against the Patriots at a huge lead, and the Patriots came back and beat them. And so there have been these sports moments where Atlanta teams have had leads and then lost them. So to have this narrative of this comeback for the people, a lot of Atlanta, to like put this comeback out there and have the whole world be watching was just, from a sports narrative, very cool to watch. But we want to talk about how that happened a little bit, right? And give some due to the people that have been working on that for a lifetime, for decades. But obviously it's getting a lot of attention right now, right? And it starts with Stacey Abrams. Everyone's hearing about Stacey Abrams, but there are also some other people that deserve a shout out. I know you really wanted to make sure they got their name heard, right? And we give them credit. So I'll let you start with some of those names.
Okay, so here's one name so we're going to talk about Black women. This is really key, right? That all of the names I'm going to read are going to be the names of Black women. But I also want to mention, we just lost John Lewis, and John Lewis represented a district in Georgia. And so it was partly, he a great voting rights activist we've talked about on the show, someone that inspired me, someone who I've posted on the Next Up Instagram page. And so I think also when I think about Georgia and Atlanta specifically, I just think about the historic nature of what just happened, that Georgia being a part of the South, a part of this legacy of voter suppression, and the people there have organized so hard over the last 4 years to be able to overcome that. And Stacey Abrams, I knew her name from a couple of years ago when she ran for governor and lost, and that's when I became aware of a lot of the voter suppression tactics taking place there. And what was very significant about her run there was that she would have been, if she had won, the first Black governor in the history, Black female governor in the history of the United States. And I believe, based on the circumstances, I believe that, when we talk about voter fraud, there was some fraud there, and it was within the bounds of the system. So the governor who won, or the person who won, the candidate who won, Brian Kemp, was also at that time the person who was able to certify the votes. So he was both the candidate and the judge. And so you think about how much of a conflict of interest that is. Wouldn't you make sure that you win? I mean, even if there was no fraud, now there's a question, there's a cloud hanging over you, right? So Stacey Abrams saw that. She also was very well aware of all of the tactics that had started to take shape, and she built a nonprofit called Fair Fight. And she has focused on that for the last 2 years. She's written books and she's done all of the interviews. I've listened to so many interviews with her. I've started listening to her book as an audiobook. She was a part of the movie All In. I think it's very much around. I haven't finished watching it, but we will get to that eventually. And it's very much around the work that she's been doing. And in the last week or so, I think everybody on social media now knows her name if they did not know it before. But the thing about what we seem to do as a culture by celebrating the individual, we forget that the individual is not alone in any of their work ever. So there are always others, and they need to be acknowledged too, because there are going to be people who are named and people who are unnamed. So Stacey Abrams has a staff. That is just a fact. Just like every leader that we celebrate has a staff, they have a team. But in this particular case, she also organized with other organizers. So her staff and her team are, while they may be unnamed, they weren't the only folks who were participating. There were leaders of other organizations that she worked with collectively to really bring new voters to this election. So I want to start off, before I get into their names, I just want to start off with, when we talk about their impact, I want to read a few numbers to you, okay? So 1.2 million African Americans in Georgia voted, and that's up from 500,000 in the 2016 election. So that's huge. That doesn't happen normally. Now, these organizers helped to register more than 800,000 new voters. This is why Georgia flipped blue. This and this alone. If people don't take anything else away from this election, it's that there is power in numbers. There is power when you come out and you participate in the democratic process. Something I want to mention, though, I don't know the numbers in Georgia, but one of the things that I observed through working on, trying to launch an app to serve the Harris County voters was that in Harris County, Texas, there were 1.6 million voters during this election cycle. And that was great. That was more than in 2016. But Harris County has 3 million registered voters. So just over half actually showed up. And I suspect that that is the same in Georgia, in Fulton County. So that means this work has to continue, because what's to come for Georgia specifically, and for all of us, is a runoff election in the Senate. And I was listening to a podcast, I believe it was The Daily by New York Times earlier this week, where they talked a little bit about the structure of that system, which I didn't know anything about in that state. I'm worried actually about that. And my hope, and I already see Stacey Abrams and the folks that whose names I'm about to mention, I've seen that they are already organizing. They've already moved to the next chapter, and that is the next chapter, and that's going to determine the balance of power in the Senate for all of us, and it's going to determine the success or failure of the policies that we feel like we have voted for when we cast a ballot for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So the other organizers I want to mention, that I want to recognize to make sure that their names are documented somewhere in a podcast, it's Tamieka Atkins, Deborah Scott, Helen Butler, and I apologize to the next person because I do not know how to pronounce this name. It looks like Nse Ufot. I'm not sure. It's Nse. That's the first name, and then Ufot. I tried to find her on Instagram. Unfortunately, it didn't look like she had a very active profile. So I was hoping she had one of those kind of profiles where she put the pronunciation of her name. So these are the other organizers who lead organizations in Georgia, and they were significant, just as significant as Stacey Abrams. And she also acknowledged them, just to be clear, because she saw that people were only giving her the credit, but she made sure she gave them the credit too. So, those folks, I'm very grateful for them. Those Black women, I am grateful for those Black women because they showed up for America.
And they've been showing up for America, right? They didn't just show up on election day, right? Like they were going out, they saw the writing, they've seen the writing on the wall probably for their entire lives, right? And they've been out there doing it before so many people even knew that was going to be an issue, right? And they saw that, hey, if we get these people out, we get them registered, we can change what our society looks like. And yeah. I hope that this team is put on some type of task force or some type of committee so we can replicate and duplicate and put this out into every state, right?
Yeah.
Like, because they've created a process. It's a very manual process, very labor intensive, kind of goes against how we feel about with technology and everything that we're working with. But like, get people on the ground, in the streets, talking with people and filling out the paperwork, doing everything we can to get people to like you said, participate in the democratic process, because it is a foundation of how we are going to make change. There's lots of more things that need to happen. But what they did is absolutely incredible. And I love that you wanted to mention them on the show. I'm going to make sure their names get highlighted too. I'll put them up on text here on the show so we see them.
Cool.
And yeah, thank you to all of those Black women who are changing our country by the work that they did. They deserve the recognition.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
So one thing that you mentioned that I want to also say is that, as we think about these Black women in this particular election, you did say, there have been Black women who have been doing the work. And I also wanted to mention, there's a book out there. I haven't read it. I want to get it because I just heard about it this morning. It's called Vanguard: How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All. And it's by Martha S. Jones. And I was reading an article where this book was mentioned. And I just wrote down the names of some of the other Black women who have been leading the fight for voting rights since, well, it's been going on since forever, but at least within this article, it started with the 1850s. And I wanted to just make sure that we acknowledge those women, because while we're talking about modern day voting rights activists, there have been, from the very beginning of, I would say, people of African descent in this country, there have always been people fighting for the rights to participate in the system fully. And the names that the article mentioned were, some of them I knew, some of them I didn't. And I just also want to, for the voters of the future, I want them to find this book. I want them to go back and read about these particular women and understand that the language of voting rights and the strategies of voting rights really developed over time. And it developed with the leadership of Black women who have often been forgotten by history and are not mentioned when we talk about, even now, when we're talking about what the contributions of Black women have been, we only talk about them in a contemporary context, as if no other women ever came before them. And this is not a new problem. So this country that we live in, the United States, is 244 years old. The first enslaved peoples from Africa arrived, as we understand it, in 1619. That's 401 years. So I'm going to make the argument that for at least 401 years, there have been people who have asked to be full participants in this system. And one of the earlier documented stories that we know about more broadly is that of Sojourner Truth, who gave the I Am a Woman speech in Massachusetts in the 1850s. We also know the name of Harriet Tubman. They often are referred to as suffragists for women's rights and for, the woman's right to vote. But when women can vote, that means, and especially if Black women can vote, that means everyone can vote, right? So I want to make sure we're clear on, they weren't just women. They weren't just women who were advocating for women's right to vote. They were advocating for everyone's right to vote and be full and equal citizens. They did not see that in their lifetimes. Next, in the 1900s, we had Ida B. Wells, Juno Frankie, Juno Frankie Pierce, Maddie E. Coleman, Mary Church Terrell, Nanny Helen Burroughs, Septima Clark, Fannie Lou Hamer. Some of these names have become more prominent in recent years, and I've listened to some podcasts about these individual women and the work that they did in their lives. I need to learn more about them because some of them, from what I have read about, were very radical for their times. They'd be radical for now. And I think there's a lot that I can learn. And as I look to continue the legacy of fighting for voting rights in this country, but doing it through technology, I want to look to their example. I want to be led by their thinking. And I'm glad that we've taken a moment to honor and acknowledge the work that has come before. And I think, and my hope is that for the voter of the future, that they do the same and also continue the legacy.